All last time.
Yeah, I was just going to give it to you right now. It is 4:42 when all losses, and you guys are good to go. Have a good round of it.
Thanks. Just as a heads up, I have the trial handbook and everything on this screen. So if I'm looking over here, that's what I'm looking at. I'm now calling the trial of Joey Petrillo versus Harper Martini in Peonia Estates. Are both parties present?
Yes,
Yes,
Your
Your Honor.
Are there any pretrials to attend to? Pretrial matters, excuse me.
Yes, Your Honor. May we make appearances?
Please do.
Your Honor, my name is Patrick Arnold, and along with my co-counsel, Madeline Turk.
Good afternoon, Your Honor.
And Matthew Moorhead.
Good afternoon, Your Honor.
We represent the plaintiff in today's case.
And can we have appearances from the defense as well?
Yes, Your Honor. Good afternoon. My name's Magna Melcote, and alongside my co-counsel, Magnolia Stewart.
Good afternoon, Your Honor.
And Alec Graven.
Good afternoon, Your Honor.
We represent the defendant, Peonia Estates.
Okay. Are there any pretrial matters from the plaintiff?
Yes, Your Honor. First, we would like to ask if you have a copy of the bench book, but as you have previously stated, it sounds like you do have a copy of the bench book. We'd also at this point like to invoke the Rule 615, the constructive sequestration of all witnesses barring a party representative. The plaintiff does not have a party representative in today's case.
Are there any objections from the defense?
None, Your Honor, to that.
Does the defense have a party rep?
No, Your Honor.
Okay. No party reps in trial today then.
We would also like to ask Your Honor's preferences on how to handle Zoom functionalities, permissions about sharing our screens for exhibits, demonstratives, or affidavits.
I would say go ahead and show it. If the opposing party, when you're showing it, you're not showing it to the jury, you're showing it to me, and then just ask to publish to the jury after you've admitted it or want it to be seen by the jury.
Yes, Your Honor. And so on that, are we under the assumption that all exhibits that have not been entered into evidence already, even if displayed on the screen, are constructively barred from the eyes of the jury?
Yes, the jury won't see it until you ask to be published.
And yes, Your Honor. And one last thing is the plaintiff at this point would like to direct your attention towards stipulations 3 and 4. Stipulation 3 reads that exhibits 1 through 10 have already been pre-admitted into evidence and therefore can be used or referred to without objection at any time by either party, including during opening and closing statements. And
is that your understanding as well, defense counsel?
Yes, Your Honor, that's our understanding.
Okay.
And if I could also direct your attention to stipulation number 4, because the plaintiff is pursuing a negligence per se case today, and we are calling Lonnie Paris, under stipulation 4, exhibit 11 is also entered into evidence without objection.
And is that your understanding as well?
Yes, Your Honor.
Okay. Court notes both stipulations 3 and 4 for the record.
And with that, Your Honor, the plaintiff is ready to proceed.
Okay. Any further pretrial from the defense?
Yes, Your Honor, briefly. We'd like to invoke Rule 603, which states that all witnesses are constructively sworn in before their testimony.
603 is invoked.
And Your Honor, because of the Zoom function, we will be using one camera and having our attorneys come in and out of the room so that people can remove their masks safely. So we'd ask for a minute or two in between examinations so that our attorneys can come in and out of the room.
Okay. I would, if it was possible, I'd ask that you do change the name so I know who to refer to.
Yes, Your Honor. We will also be changing the name in between during that minute when we're switching out.
Okay. Anything further from the defense?
And Your Honor, we'd ask that all objection arguments are held constructively outside the earshot of the jury.
They will be.
And Your Honor, with that, the defense is ready to proceed with opening statements.
Okay. Opening from the plaintiff.
Yes, Your Honor. May I proceed?
You may.
May it please the court, opposing counsel, members of the jury. When a winery has multiple FDA violations for the misuse of pesticides over the course of 2 years, it's no surprise that something is destined to go wrong. On the evening of June 7th, 2019, Casey Soto and Genesis Petrillo were having their rehearsal dinner at Peonia Estates before their wedding planned for June 8th. Casey's parent, Harper Martini, presented Genesis with a bottle of 2019 Carr wine during the rehearsal dinner. After drinking the wine, Genesis died. And a toxicology report showed that there were pesticides in Genesis's system. These pesticides in the bottle of wine were as a result of the poor health and safety practices of Peony Estates and the defendant's failure to enforce necessary health statutes to protect those consuming their product. Now, to hold the defendant accountable for the death of Genesis Petrillo, the plaintiff will prove by a preponderance of the evidence that the defendant is guilty of negligence per se. This means that after hearing all of the elements in today's case, you all, as reasonable people, can come to the conclusion that Peony Estates was negligent in their handling of pesticides and that this negligence caused the death of Genesis Petrillo. According to case law Wando v. Cornforth, negligence per se requires us to prove four things. First is that the defendant violated a statute. Second is that the statute in question is a safety statute, which is not in question given that Section 12100 is a safety statute. Third is that the defendant's actions caused the type of harm that this statute was intended to prevent. And fourth is that the plaintiff was a member of the statute's protected class, which is also not in question given that Genesis Petrillo was intended to be protected. This leaves us with two obligations to prove to the court today. First is that the defendant violated Midland's Building Code Section 12100, which requires facilities where products are kept to be kept sanitary with preventative measures against contamination, effective measures against the storage of pesticides, and hygienic practices meant to protect its consumers. Second is that the defendant acted in a way that allowed pesticides to get into that bottle of 2019 Cara wine, ultimately causing Genesis's death. To prove our burden today, you will hear from three witnesses. First, you'll hear from Lonnie Paras, an investigative journalist who investigated Peony Estates over the course of 3 years. In his investigation, he observed the bottle of 2019 Cara wine on multiple occasions in direct proximity to empty pesticide containers. Mr. Paras then determined that there were pesticides inside the bottle of 2019 Cara wine and that those pesticides match the exact same pesticides that Peony Estates uses on their grapes. Lastly, he was able to verify that Genesis Petrillo died of pesticide poisoning by obtaining her death certificate. Second, you'll hear from Danny Francasio, the owner of Rosie and Pedro, another winery in the valley. The defendant contacted Ms. Francasio because they did not know how to safely handle pesticides and ensure that their employees followed safe procedures so that no wine would be contaminated. And lastly, you'll hear from Riley Adkins O'Keefe, the FDA inspector who performed multiple inspections on Peony Estates. In the year preceding Genesis's death, Inspector O'Keefe found that Peony Estates had been storing and using pesticides using unsafe methods. In a visit just a month before the wedding, he found that not only were they still storing pesticides in unsafe ways, but also that their employees weren't aware of the necessary safety guidelines and procedures to keep people safe. Finally, just days before the wedding, O'Keefe found a single bottle of 2019 Cara wine in the bottling area right next to where pesticides were previously stored. Then, on June 7th, 2019, Harper Martini gifted that same bottle of 2019 Cara wine to Genesis Petrillo. Genesis Petrillo drank that wine, and at 9:27 a.m. on the morning of her wedding, Genesis was pronounced dead due to pesticide poisoning and contaminated wine. The defense will be pushing a narrative of alternative causes of death and emotional pulls. We ask you to look at the concrete evidence provided in today's trial to come to the logical and reasonable conclusion that Peony Estates negligently handled pesticides and disregarded safety statutes intended to protect their consumers. As a result, it ended in the tragic death of Genesis Petrillo the morning of their wedding. Because of this, at the end of the trial, my co-counsel, Maddie Turk, will ask you to find Harper Martini and Peony Estates liable for negligence per se. Thank you.
Thank you, counsel. Opening for the defense.
Yes, Your Honor. The plaintiff picked the wrong poison. Members of the jury, plaintiff's counsel just told you a story. They told you a story about how Harper Martini improperly stored pesticides that later that later infected the wine that Genesis Petrillo drank. But members of the jury, that's just not the case. The plaintiff's story is not more likely than not. And the plaintiff will not be able to meet their burden today because in their story, they focused on pesticides. But the real poison in today's story was alcohol. You see, on June 9th, 2019, the friends and families of Genesis Petrillo and Casey Soto gathered to celebrate their wedding. This weekend was supposed to start their new lives together, but the night of the rehearsal dinner ended in tragedy. You see, today you're going to hear about how Genesis Petrillo and Harper Martini, Casey's father, didn't get along. And that was no different on the night of the rehearsal dinner. Genesis and Harper got into a fight, and that fight led Genesis to become worried. Worried that she might not be able to marry Casey, and worried that she might lose the love of her life. So Genesis drank and drank and drank. And at the end of that night, she was rushed to the hospital, but it was too late. She died. Now, the plaintiff is placing blame where there isn't any because they picked the wrong poison. Now, in trial today, you're going to hear about how Genesis and Harper didn't get along. Casey Soto, Genesis's fiance, will tell you that they argued, particularly about their wedding. And Blair Osborne, Casey and Genesis's wedding planner, will tell you the same. Harper and Genesis disagreed about nearly every detail of the wedding. Now, plaintiff's counsel just got up here and told you a lot about a bottle of wine, and we agree that Genesis did drink that wine, but where we don't agree is what came of Genesis drinking that wine. You see, you're going to hear about how Genesis and Harper got into a fight at the beginning of the rehearsal dinner. And Casey will tell you that that fight led her to think about calling off her wedding. And now, even though the happy couple decided to continue with the ceremony, you'll hear that Genesis still had a nagging voice in the back of her head, telling her that she might not be able to marry Casey. And so to quiet that voice, Genesis drank champagne, tequila, wine, whatever she could get her hands on. Both Casey and Blair will tell you that Genesis was drinking steadily throughout the night of the rehearsal dinner. And because of this, you'll hear from Dr. Reed Cannon, an expert toxicologist. Now, Dr. Cannon will explain to you how pesticides affect the body or how alcohol poisoning affects the body. And he'll also tell you that there's no way to definitively know what caused Genesis Petrillo's death. Members of the jury, the plaintiff's story is not more likely than not. And at the end of the day, what you will be able to know is that none of the options presented to you today are more likely than not. And the plaintiff will not be able to meet their burden in today's case because they picked the wrong poison. Thank you.
Thank you, counsel. Does the plaintiff have any witnesses to call?
Yes, Your Honor. The plaintiff will be calling Lonnie Paris to the stand.
Your Honor, if defense counsel could just have a moment to switch out attorneys before plaintiff calls their first witness.
Yeah, and for future reference, don't ask the court, just do it. And if I need to pause so that everyone sits in, I'll pause it, but just go ahead and switch out. Is defense ready?
Yes, Your Honor.
Plaintiff, Please proceed.
Mr. Paris, are you there?
Yes.
Please state your name for the court, spelling the last for the record.
My name is Lonnie Paris, Paras.
Mr. Paris, what's your background?
Well, I'm a journalist and one of the best ones out there. I have my master's degree from BU in science journalism, and I've been in the game for the past 15 years doing investigative work. They haven't stepped me yet, and they ain't gonna.
How'd you get involved in today's case?
Well, it was back in 2016. I received a tip about a winery's use of pesticides. Little did I know it would lead me down a path, chasing down leads of pesticide misuse, poisonings, and an ultimately tragic ending. My story was on the now famous Peony Estates.
And how confident are you in your story's accuracy?
Very. I hold my work to the highest standards, and I would never release a story that I couldn't confirm with impeccable sources. Over the course of my 2-year investigation into Peony, I uncovered several significant pieces of evidence. It took me years of my life, but it's a price I'm willing to pay for the truth.
So I'd like you to take us through your story, starting with the pesticides. How did you begin your investigation?
Well, the bulk of my investigation came from firsthand observations. I would join one of the winery tours and then slip out to poke around behind the scenes of the estates. Over the years, I became familiar with Peony's employees, practices, and facilities, like their private offices and bottling areas.
How would you describe Peony's facilities?
Occasionally, it looked fairly tidy, but for the most part, the back rooms and bottling area were littered with these discarded aluminum pesticide cans. They were all labeled with the same brand called Bug Off. I also explored Mr. Martini's office. He was the owner of the estate. And in there, I found my first big break, a private all-staff memo.
And would you recognize this memo if I showed it to you today?
I would.
Your Honor, permission for co-counsel to display Exhibit 12.
Yes, and you don't need to ask permission, just do it.
Thank you, Your Honor. Mr. Paris, what is this document?
This is the memo that I found in Mr. Martini's room from Austin Lewis, the head winemaker.
And how do you recognize it as such?
It has the email addresses on top.
And is this a fair and accurate copy?
It appears to be yes.
And does it appear to be modified in any way?
No.
The plaintiff now enters Exhibit 12 into evidence.
Any objection?
Your Honor, I object to hearsay. Not enough foundation has been laid that the opposing party was actually the author of these statements. Just having a source link to an email address is not enough to establish that these statements are authentically that of the party opponent.
Response?
Your Honor, per Rule 801D2D, this is an exception to hearsay because it's a statement by the party's employee.
Have we heard that an employee wrote this?
Yes, Your Honor. It is written by Mr. Austin Lewis, who was employed by Peony Estates.
Okay, on those grounds, I'm going to overrule the objection, and Exhibit 12 is in.
So, may I continue?
Yes.
Mr. Paris, how did this memo add to your story about pesticide usage at Peony Estates?
Well, like I said, at the top, it's written by a Mr. Lewis who identifies himself as the head winemaker at Peony, so I couldn't ask for a better source for my story. He states that there had been a recent insect infestation seriously eating into the estate's profits that called for immediate action.
And did Mr. Lewis suggest any immediate action?
He did. He writes in the email, "We need each and every one of you to prepare the entirety of Peony Estates for an imminent pesticide spraying. We need to do this quickly and cheaply. Nothing else matters."
And did you learn anything about the winemaking process during the course of your investigation?
Like I said, I was taking these wine tours twice monthly, and I discovered, importantly, that Peony Estates only produces wines with grapes from the year prior. So a 2018 wine is made with 2017 grapes, a 2017 wine with 2016 grapes, and so on.
And why was that important to your story?
Well, I was concerned about the 2019 wines that would be produced from the 2018 grapes, because I had evidence that the pesticides were in use throughout 2018. Like I said, each month I visited, I saw new and old pesticide cans, and the email I just read said that they were spraying the entirety of the premises. So I extended my investigation into 2019 to track those potentially contaminated new batches of wine.
Can you describe your next notable visit to Peony Estates?
Yeah, it was June 7th, and the owner's daughter was getting married, and I had the perfect disguise, a caterer. After I snuck a few desserts off a tray, I slipped out of the dinner to do some more digging in the back rooms while everyone else was distracted.
And did you find anything in the back rooms?
Well, the most obvious thing to me was this single bottle of wine on a shelf all on its own. That bottle was labeled 2019 Cara, and it stuck out because it was the only bottle like it that I'd seen the entire night. And it was sitting by itself across from an empty pesticide can in the bottling area.
And after you found the 2019 Cara, what did you do?
Well, as I was making a mental note, I saw the owner, Mr. Martini, taking that bottle of 2019 Cara off the shelf and carrying it away. I decided to go into the event hall to follow, but before I did, I took a sample from that bottle of pesticide so I could send it into a lab for analysis.
And that night, did you see anyone drink that bottle of Cara?
Well, Mr. Martini hand-delivered the bottle to the bride-to-be, Genesis. I saw her pouring and drinking the whole night, and as far as I know, there wasn't a full bottle of wine by the end of the night.
So let's continue. Did you visit the estates the next day?
I did. I came back the next morning and something was immediately wrong when I got there. People were talking about ambulances at 3 a.m. My best guess was that someone was in the hospital, so I rushed over.
And did you find anything at the hospital?
Unfortunately, yes. Just as I got there, the attending doctor to Genesis was telling a few of the wedding guests that Miss Petrillo had been killed by pesticides, that she was poisoned.
Objection, Your Honor, to hearsay.
To what statements in particular?
Specifically that Genesis Petrillo died of pesticide poisoning.
Response?
Your Honor, per Rule 8039, this is also an exception to hearsay, given that it's a public record of death.
Your Honor, I'm not objecting to the public record. I'm objecting to the statement that was made to the wedding guests that Genesis Petrillo died of pesticide poisoning. I'm not objecting to a record. No record has been admitted into evidence. I'm objecting to the actual statement that was made.
Response?
Your Honor, there's also Rule 8034, which says that given it's a statement on a medical condition, it is also an exception to hearsay.
Response on 8034.
Yes, Your Honor. Not sufficient foundation has been laid in order to establish 8034. Specifically, what this witness said is that there was a doctor who was talking to wedding guests. But 8034 requires the treating of a medical diagnosis with the patient themselves. But this is with wedding guests that were unconnected to the diagnosis. So it's nothing related to furthering that medical diagnosis. We also don't know if this doctor was specifically talking about Genesis's diagnosis itself.
I agree with the defense counsel and will sustain and strike that portion of the testimony.
All right, then I'll continue with my question, and Mr. Paris, you can answer as such. So did you end up finding anything at the hospital?
After hearing some statements from the doctor, I needed a better source. So I obtained Genesis Petrillo's death certificate from the county records.
And would you recognize a copy of this death certificate?
I would.
Could co-counsel please bring up Exhibit 7? Thank you, co-counsel. So, Mr. Paris, how did this death certificate help develop your investigation?
Well, in this document written by the chief emergency physician, it states that Ms. Petrillo died of respiratory failure caused by pesticide poisoning. The method of poisoning is identified as ingestion of isofenfos, a chemical in the pesticide, likely through contaminated wine.
And is there anything else in this document that was relevant to your story?
Yes, the doctor also wrote the following summary below. Patient attended a wedding where patient ingested the organophosphate pesticide isofenfos at lethal doses, along with alcohol. The most likely source of the poisoning is the wine the patient ingested with dinner.
So, Mr. Paris, before publishing your story, did you collect any more evidence?
Well, the story I was chasing had gained more weight than just another environmental interest story. People's lives were at stake, so I looked for even more evidence. After her death, police retrieved a sample of the 2019 Cara that was gifted to her that night, and I had a sample from the pesticide. If the wine was contaminated, we could expect to see high levels of pesticide chemicals in the wine sample through a lab test.
And did you obtain those test reports?
I did.
Would you recognize a copy of these reports if I were to show you them today?
I would.
Could co-counsel please bring up Exhibits 10 and 11? Thank you, co-counsel. And Mr. Paris, could you describe to the court what these samples are in these two reports analyzed?
Right. One is from me, that sample from the pesticide can near the bottle of Cara on the counter right before dinner. The other sample is from the police department and from the specific bottle of 2019 Cara that Mr. Martini gave to Ms. Petrillo at the dinner.
And what were the results of that lab analysis?
Well, the lab was searching for irregular levels of pesticide chemicals. The can of pesticide had tested for high levels of isofenphos, which makes sense because that's a main ingredient in the pesticide.
And what about the 2019 Cara?
So that wine bottle had only one type of pesticide flagged as high, and it was isofenphos, the exact same chemical as in the pesticide that Peony Estates had used in 2018 and left in the bottling station in 2019.
So, Mr. Paris, you authored a comprehensive piece on the story of Peony Estates pesticides and Miss Petrio's death. How confident are you in your sources?
Extremely. I witnessed discarded pesticides in back rooms, obtained a death certificate, had Peony's pesticides and the 2019 Cara chemically tested, and obtained emails from senior staff at Peony Estates. Look, I wouldn't have run this story if I couldn't confirm it 3 times over.
And after investigating Peony Estates for years, how did you conclude your story?
Look, at the end of the day, I'm a journalist with a job to find out the truth. I have evidence that there were pesticides in the wine that Genesis drank the night before she died. Her death certificate states that she died from pesticide poisoning, and that was the exact same pesticide chemicals that Peony Estates was leaving next to their wine cellars for at least 2 years. I leave my readers to connect the dots from there.
No further questions, Your Honor.
Cross for this witness?
Yes, Your Honor. So, Mr. Paris, you said that you spent years of your life on this single case, right?
Good afternoon. Yes, I did.
So if you were wrong about Peony Estates with any wrongdoing, you would have spent years of your life chasing the wrong lead, right?
I'm not sure what you mean because I found all that evidence, but I guess if I hadn't found that evidence of pesticide misuse, then it would have been a waste of time, sure.
So let's talk about how you got started in this case. In 2016, you received a news tip about Peony Estates and pesticide use, right?
That was in 2016. It had come from a rival winery down the road. And when I get these business tips, a lot of the time, there's not much merit to it. It's attempted sabotage. So I put it on the back burner for a few years.
But that news tip got your whole case started, right?
Absolutely.
And that news tip was from Danny Francasio.
Like I said, an owner of a winery down the road. And at the time, it didn't look like there was much merit to it, but I'm glad I continued the investigation.
Not just that, Mr. Paris. Mr. Francasio owns one of the largest competing wineries to Peony Estates, right?
That's 100% correct.
Now, you lost your job as an investigative journalist around the time of 2016, right?
Yes, that's true.
You were looking for work,
100%.
couldn't find it,
Nope.
and you received a temporary job offer, right?
Well, so what had happened was that I was running a blog on the side to keep my writing skills sharp, and one day I needed something to write about. I picked up that 2016 tip and continued my investigation from there.
Yes, you received a temporary job offer,
Yes.
but that job offer is conditional on you drawing enough readers' interest into your stories, right?
I'm sorry, I think I might have your timeline mixed up. I received the temporary job offer after I published my story on Peony Estates.
Yes, but your job offer is conditional on your future stories about Peony Estates drawing enough reader interest, right?
Absolutely. And look, there's enough interest generated already. This is a story of absolute import to the people of Midlands. Someone died.
So, Mr. Paris, let's talk about some of your methods. You visited Peony Estates numerous times, right?
Well, I didn't just visit, I investigated for numbers of years.
Yes, you went to Peony Estates in disguises, right?
Absolutely. The truth can't hide from me.
You broke into restricted sections without permission.
They had nothing to hide, they had nothing to fear. But I'm glad I did because I found key evidence in this case of pesticide misuse.
You used lockpicks to break into private residences.
Objection, Your Honor. Relevance. The question of whether he used lockpicks or not is not directly relevant to Peony Estates and negligent handling of pesticides. It's not relevant to today's case, and the trial was brought up.
Response.
Your Honor, this is absolutely relevant. It speaks to this witness's bias and credibility. The fact that this witness used many illegal methods and the specific methods that he used in order to obtain his information helps the jury to paint a picture of how much weight they should give to Mr. Paris's conclusions.
Could you explain how it goes to his bias? I mean, it just sounds like he was an undercover, investigator.
Yes, specifically the fact that Mr. Paris worked on this case for years, used illegal methods in order to come to his conclusions, used lockpicks to access doors which he was not supposed to enter. It speaks to his excessive interest in this case, and also investigative journalist methods that are unsavory. And so if his methods are inadequate, then it draws into question his conclusions that he reached from his methods.
I'm gonna overrule. However, I'd advise counsel to not focus on the unsavoriness of the methods and more as to his interest in the case. To overrule.
Yes, Your Honor. So, Mr. Paris, after all this investigation, you never saw anyone mishandle pesticides, right?
I didn't make it a practice to actually engage with the employees, but I did see on repeated visits cans of pesticides littering the back rooms.
But you never saw open pesticide containers that had pesticides in them, right?
I saw discarded ones, full and empty, in the back rooms.
Yes, but the full pesticide canisters were closed, right?
Right, but not disposed of in a proper manner.
And the other pesticide canisters were empty.
Right, again, not disposed of according to Midland statutes.
You never saw anyone spray pesticides while you were on the premises.
No, but they left their pesticides within the wine cellars and bottling areas of their winery.
Mr. Paris, this might be a simple question. You never actually saw any pesticides go into any food or beverages, right?
No.
All right, now I want to talk about the night of the wedding rehearsal dinner because you were there, right?
Absolutely, that's what I said.
Now, you saw Genesis Petrillo that night, right?
I did.
You saw her consume alcohol?
I did.
Saw her consume practically a whole bottle of wine.
Like I said, there was drinking at the wedding, but I was mostly keeping track of that 2019 Cara that Mr. Martini hand-delivered to Genesis.
Exactly. One thing that you weren't keeping track of was the amount of drinks that Genesis Petrillo was consuming, right?
No, I was much more concerned about the contaminated wine that was presented to her.
And while you were at that rehearsal dinner, you saw Miss Petrillo on the dance floor appear very disoriented, right?
She was dancing. I saw that.
Specifically, you saw her disoriented, right?
Like I said, not everyone's I would just say maybe she wasn't the most natural dancer, sure.
Mr. Paris, this is very, very important, so I want to be very specific. You would characterize Miss Petrillo that night as rather disoriented, right?
Right. And I later came to know that that was likely because of the contaminated wine that she drank.
Mr. Paris, you don't know how much alcohol Genesis Petrillo consumed that night, do you?
No more than you do, counsel.
I have no further questions.
Any redirect?
No, Your Honor.
Mr. Paris, you're excused. Is there another witness for the plaintiff?
Yes, Your Honor. The plaintiff calls Danny Francasio to the stand.
Ms. Fracasio, and we'll give a defense a moment to switch out.
Yes, Your Honor.
One moment, Your Honor. Your Honor, we're ready. Thank you.
Plaintiff, proceed when ready.
Please state your name for the court, spelling the last.
Danny Francasio, Francazio.
Why don't you tell me a bit about yourself, Danny?
Of course, I was practically born in a vineyard and raised by the grapes. I remember stomping grapes in my youth, and I consider myself to be quite the cork dork. I love wine, and quite fittingly, I am the proud owner and operator of Rosie and Pedro Winery.
Where is your business located?
Well, I felt the grape gods calling me to Midlands, so I now proudly operate what I'd like to call the Bordeaux of Midlands, and have for the last 15 years.
So, are you pretty experienced with the wine business?
Of course I am. I know pretty much all there is to know about the art of winemaking. In fact, I consider myself a master enologist. That's an expert in the science of wine.
Is running a winery difficult?
Well, the grape gods have blessed me with exceptional talent and skill when it comes to the wine business. However, there are a lot of responsibilities to juggle. You have to manage the land, process the grapes, comply with the health code, and make sure all your wine is stored properly and away from pests, which can be a major issue for a lot of wineries.
Have you ever dealt with pests before?
On occasion, yes, dealing with pests is honestly just part of the business sometimes, but the true test of a good vintner, that's a winemaker, is how you deal with the pests.
Well, how do you deal with pests then?
Well, you have to use some sort of pesticide, but pesticides can be extremely dangerous, and so you have to be very, very careful.
Could you tell me about the steps you take at your winery when using pesticides?
Well, at Rosie and Pedro, we store our pesticides in a garage that is far, far away.
Objection, Your Honor. To relevance. May I be heard?
Yes.
Your Honor, this witness is testifying to the practices that she takes at Rosie and Pedro Winery. That is not the standard that we are using for negligence to determine whether or not Peony Estates was negligent in their handling of pesticides. We use Midland's code and case law to decide whether or not Midland's Peony Estates was up to the standard. And so what precautions Rosie and Pedro took are irrelevant to this case. The only standard that is relevant is in the case law.
Counsel, what is that standard?
Your
The defense attorney, what is the standard? Sorry.
Yes, Your Honor. I believe it's in the Midlands Penal Code. I will find it in one moment.
Meanwhile, do you have a response, plaintiff counsel?
Yes, I do, Your Honor. May I make an offer of proof?
Briefly.
Yes, later on in this question, my witness will go to say that the practices she follows at Rosie and Pedro aren't just ones that they follow there, but rather ones that are required by the law. This is foundational for establishing that she at Rosie and Pedro understands what those processes are, and that in her expertise as a winemaker, she can testify to what the law requires.
Are you all, this witness as an expert witness for what the law requires for safety?
Not as an expert witness, but just to testify to her experience as a winemaker and what she knows of the law and how that follows at her winery, and then how that shows how the law is required in the sense of a winery.
Can I be heard, Your Honor?
Final response.
Your Honor, I have the case law pulled up, Midlands Building Code Section 12100, Pest and Pesticide, and this details exactly what the standards are that wineries have to adhere to. The fact that Rosie and Pedro did adhere to some standard, that they took certain practices, is irrelevant to this case. Now, this witness isn't testifying about her knowledge of that statute. All she's saying is that my winery took certain precautions. She didn't even mention this statute. Therefore, that testimony is irrelevant.
I'm going to sustain at this point, but if plaintiff counsel can lay the foundation first for the statute, the requirements of the statute, and her following that statute, then at that point it'd be fine. So sustain at this point.
Move to strike.
Granted.
Yes, Your Honor. Now, is Rosie and Pedro the only winery in the area?
No. A couple miles away in this swamp, there's a winery called Peony Estates.
Do you know anything about Peony Estates?
The owner, Harper Martini, used to be one of my little cellar rats. Don't worry, that's just what we winemakers call our cellar workers. Anyway, Harper left my winery to open Peony Estates, but she still constantly asks me for advice about her winery, so I do know about her operation.
She asks you for advice?
Yes. Harper has emailed me asking about how to get rid of bugs at her winery on multiple occasions.
Would you recognize these emails if I were to show you in court today?
Yes, I would.
I now ask co-counsel to please bring up exhibits 13 and 14.
I see them on the screen. Thank you.
Perfect. And could you identify these documents for us, Ms. Francasio?
Yes, of course. These are the emails that were exchanged between me and Harper.
And how do you recognize them as such?
I see my email address as well as Harper's email address on the documents.
Do these appear to be a fair and accurate copy?
Yes, they do.
Your Honor, plaintiff now enters exhibits 13 and 14 into evidence.
Any objection?
Yes, Your Honor, to hearsay specifically to exhibit 14.
What part of 14?
Specifically Danny Francasio's past statements.
Okay, response.
Yes, Your Honor, plaintiff is willing to constructively redact all statements made by Danny Francasio, as Harper Martini's statements can be entered according to 401 D2D, where opposing parties' statements are admissible.
So you're okay with the top half of 14 being redacted?
Yes, Your Honor.
Okay, and then sustain and we'll redact that part, but the rest of the exhibits come in.
Yes, sir.
So when was the first time Harper contacted you?
Harper first emailed me on August 26th, 2016.
And what was that email about?
She said she was having a ton of trouble with these swamp bugs getting into where she stores her wine.
Did you ever hear from Harper again?
Yes, I didn't reply to her email right away. I'm a busy gal, so Harper sent me another email saying, I just can't get these dang pests from my cellar and it's really making me worry. And this was over a month after the first email.
Was that the last of it?
No, I did receive another email on May 12th, 2019.
Your Honor, I now ask co-counsel to please, oh, there it is. Okay, exhibit 17. Ms. Francasio, can you identify this for us?
This is the email that Harper sent me on May 12th, 2019.
And how do you recognize this as such?
I see my email address as well as Harper's email address on the document.
And is it a fair and accurate copy?
Yes.
The plaintiff now enters exhibit 17 into evidence. I'd also like to note now that we would also like to constructively redact all statements made by Danny Francasio.
Does opposing counsel have any objections?
No, Your Honor, as long as those statements are redacted.
Okay, so we will assume you objected to those statements and we will sustain that, and then we will redact those statements, but the rest of it comes in.
Yes, Your Honor. Now, Ms. Francasio, what did this email say?
Harper told me she'd failed a health inspection, and for shame, the grape gods frown upon her.
What happened?
Turns out Peony Estates carried their pesticides out to where they were supposed to store them. So they'd been keeping them in the cellar and in the bottling area instead.
Were you concerned by this?
Of course I was.
Objection, Your Honor. Again, to relevance, earlier in this line of questioning, opposing counsel herself said this witness wasn't an expert. So this witness's concern over their practices is not relevant.
Response?
Yes, Your Honor. This is relevant because it goes toward the question in today's trial, which is whether or not Peony Estates was negligent. Ms. Francasio is not testifying as an expert, but she is testifying as a fellow winemaker who exists within the same community as Harper Martini, whether or not, in her opinion, as a winemaker, these practices are unacceptable or unsafe. And that goes towards negligence and creating an unsafe environment for pesticide use.
Can I be heard, Your Honor?
No, I'm going to overrule. I think their opinion as to a fellow winemaker's safety practices is an expert opinion, but it is relevant to the jury to hear. So I'm going to overrule.
So were you concerned by this, Ms. Francasio?
As I was saying, yes, I was extremely concerned. As a winemaker, you are responsible for making sure that your product is safe. It's your duty to the grapes and to the people. Keeping pesticides, poisons, that close to the wine is not only dangerous, it's also illegal.
Thank you, Your Honor. No further
Objection, Your Honor. Lack of foundation
I'm
Ma'am?
gonna I'm gonna overrule for lack of foundation. Sorry.
Yes, Your Honor.
Again, Your Honor, I finished my questioning. No further questions.
Any cross for this witness?
Yes, Your Honor. May I proceed?
Yes.
Miss Francasio, Harper Martini betrayed you, right?
I wouldn't say Harper betrayed me, but she did work for me in the past and left to open her own winery.
It's your testimony that you wouldn't say Harper betrayed you?
Harper left my winery. I suppose I would say that it was a professional betrayal.
Right, she worked for you at your winery, Rosie and Pedro, right?
Yes, Harper used to be one of my little cellar rats.
She wasn't just a cellar rat, ma'am. You actually promoted her to vineyard manager, right?
See, my two previous managers had to leave the winery, so I was forced to promote the only employee I had that could tell a Merlot from a Cabernet. So yes, I promoted Harper.
But then she left your winery, right?
As I have told you already, yes, she did.
And she actually left to start her own winery, right?
Again, yes, as I have stated already.
She took half your senior staff with her.
She did.
And the opening of Peony Estates was severely detrimental to your business, right?
See, going from being the only winery in the area to having a competitor obviously hurt me, yes.
And in 2016, things weren't looking good at Rosie and Pedro, right?
Could you clarify what you mean by things weren't looking good?
Of course, your wine sales were down.
They were, again, because I now had a competitor.
Morale was low.
Yes.
You even had to take a 25% pay cut.
I wanted to ensure that my employees were being paid fairly, and if that meant hurting myself in the process, I was willing to do it. Yes.
So you took a 25% pay cut.
I did.
And in 2016, just when this was happening, you actually got an email from Harper, right?
Yes, Harper was telling me about these horrible pest problems she was having.
Right, and you saw an opportunity, didn't you?
I saw an opportunity to what?
I'll clarify. You contacted Lonnie Paris, an investigative reporter, about this, right?
Of course, I was concerned about the safety at Peony Estates.
You contacted him about your competitor?
I did because I was worried, and as a winemaker, it is your duty to the grapes.
Objection, Your Honor. Asked and answered. Opposing counsel is just re-asking the question with the input of the word competitor. This is not eliciting any new testimony.
May I be heard, Your Honor?
No, I disagree. Overruled.
So just to be clear for the jury, you called Lonnie Paris right when your competitor emailed you, right?
Right when my competitor emailed me about a bug infestation and improper pesticide usage. Yes.
And you're telling us that it was because you were worried, but just to be clear, you actually thought that business at your winery could improve if Lonnie Paris found something that would shut down Peony Estates for good, right?
Of course, losing a competitor is always good for a business, but I respect Harper's business. I was just worried for the safety.
Ma'am, I appreciate that, but my question was a little bit more specific. Yes or no, you thought that if Lonnie Paris found something that could shut down Peony Estates, it could improve your business, right?
Yes, of course.
I have nothing further.
Any redirect?
Briefly, Your Honor.
Briefly.
Ms. Francasio, why are you testifying here today?
I am testifying here today on behalf of the public, on behalf of the grapes, on behalf of all the winemakers who would be hurt by contaminated wine and by improper business practices. I'm testified because I was worried about the conditions and the safety hazards at Peony Estates.
Objection, Your Honor. Outside the scope as to her testifying about the hazards at Peony Estates,
Well, you opened the door when you attacked the reason she was here, so this a little leeway is given, overruled.
Yes, Your Honor.
In that case, Your Honor, no further questions.
Any recross?
None, Your Honor.
Okay, Ms. Francazia, you're excused. Does the plaintiff have another witness to call?
Yes, Your Honor. At this time, the plaintiff calls Riley Adkins O'Keefe. Please stand.
Mr. O'Keefe. Just give defense counsel a second here.
Yes, Your Honor.
And actually, before I begin, may I inquire to my timekeeper exactly how much time I have remaining?
Sure.
You have 7 minutes and 5 seconds left.
You said 7-5?
Yeah, 7 minutes and 5 seconds.
Thank you. All right. May we proceed, Your Honor?
Defense ready?
Yes, Your Honor.
Proceed, plaintiff.
Yes. Good afternoon. Could you please spell your name for the court? State your name for the court, excuse me, spelling the last for the record.
Yeah. My name's Riley Atkins O'Keefe, Okeefe.
And what do you do for a living, Mr. O'Keefe?
I work for the Rapid River County Department of Health and Environmental Services, or DHES for short. I ensure proper health and safety regulations are followed in places of business.
Can you tell us a little bit more about your role with the DHES?
Yes, I'm a certified health and safety inspector and an official designee of the FDA, the Food and Drug Administration, for whom I've conducted more than 170 winery inspections since 2010.
And why are you here today, Mr. O'Keefe?
Between 2015 and 2019, I conducted 4 separate investigations into Peony Estates Winery. I'm here today to share my findings about the health and safety measures followed or disregarded by the estate.
Now, you said you conducted several inspections. Let's take those one by one, starting with the first. When did you conduct this first inspection?
Yes, I conducted my first investigation on May 11th, 2015.
And can you tell us a little bit about this inspection?
Yes, I initially found no signs of violations of any codes in the vineyard, production facilities, storage spaces, or bottling areas. However, I did find some issues with Peony's use of pesticides.
And can you tell us about those issues?
Well, due to Peony's close proximity to that swamp, they have an increased level of pests. Therefore, their pesticide level usage is above average. Chemical pesticides are dangerous poisons and they must be handled appropriately.
So what was Peony doing, or what was your problem with Peony's pesticide storage in 2015?
Well, I discovered that the pesticide storage shed was too close to the wine production and winery kitchen area. For safety reasons, we require that wineries store their pesticides at least 50 feet away from any production or storage area.
So, Mr. O'Keefe, when was your next inspection at Peony?
My next inspection took place on December 7, 2018, after receiving an anonymous letter about a potential increase in pesticide usage at Peony. Therefore, as a health and safety inspector, it was my solemn duty to investigate this tip-off.
And did you find anything of note during this inspection?
While I did not find any specific violations, I gained insight into the process Peony uses for storing and using pesticides.
And is this noteworthy?
Yes, I learned that the storage shed for the pesticides was located at the far end of the vineyard, which I believe to be a potential problem because it was so far away from the wine cellar. I asked Martini to speak to the Peony staff to learn more.
And what did you learn from the staff?
I talked to Austin Lewis to learn about the grape growing and pesticide process. I asked about the pesticide shed distance from the wine cellar and learned that my fears weren't unfounded.
What do you mean by that?
While Martini informed me that the staff was practicing all the necessary safety and precautionary measures, it was clear to me from my conversation with Lewis that employees did not always follow the process and would frequently store the pesticides closer to the wine cellar for convenience.
And so what did you do, Mr. O'Keefe?
Well, technically, the storage practice that Lewis described did not violate any codes, but I did believe that it was potentially unsafe. So I decided to return within an year's time for an unscheduled inspection.
And when did you return?
About 5 months later. It was on May 8, 2019.
And can you tell us about this inspection?
During this investigation, I discovered several major health code violations, a very concerning discovery.
Could you tell us about the first of these health code violations?
Yes, the first health code violation was when I discovered 3 containers of pesticide present in the bottling facility. The pesticides being in so close proximity to the equipment that processes open wine bottles poses a major risk to consumer health and safety. If the pesticide were to enter the wine, the results could be disastrous.
Okay, and can you tell us about another health code violation that you found at Peony that day?
I also discovered that the employees working in the bottling area were inadequately trained in the safe handling of pesticides and did not seem to know about the importance of keeping pesticides away from the wine production and processing areas.
Now, can you tell us about one more of these health code violations that you found?
Yeah, I also found a bottle of wine, Cara, sitting on a shelf close to where the pesticide cans were. The bottles might have already been contaminated due to such close proximity to the pesticide canisters.
Objection,
and
Your Honor.
therefore,
Speculation.
What is your objection?
To speculation as to whether or not the bottle of wine was contaminated by pesticides.
Response.
Your Honor, I believe that the witness, if I recall correctly, just testified that the bottle might have already been contaminated due to a close proximity. I don't think he was making any definitive assessment of whether or not the bottle was indeed or not contaminated.
May I respond, Your Honor?
Sure.
Your Honor, if this witness is testifying that the bottle of wine might have been contaminated by pesticides, then I would change my objection to relevance, as this witness's testimony about something that may have occurred is not relevant, as it does not go to his testimony in terms of the unscheduled May visit that he's testifying about.
May I respond, Your Honor?
Final response.
Your Honor, this is highly relevant as this witness is testifying to the close proximity of pesticides to this bottle of wine in question. And so he's saying that there's a potential for it to have been contaminated, which he is able to do within his capacity as a health inspector of wineries. And therefore, because of this close proximity, he is able to testify to the potential of contamination in this bottle.
I'm going to overrule both the speculation, as he's not going to the mindset of anyone, and the relevance, as it is certainly relevant. So
Yes.
overrule.
Yes, Your Honor. Mr. O'Keefe, I'll repeat the question. Could you tell us about the final health code violation that you found at Peony that day?
yes, I can. As I stated earlier, I found a bottle of wine, Cara, sitting on a shelf close to where the pesticide cans were. I thought the bottle might have already been contaminated due to such close proximity to the pesticide canisters, and therefore I told them that it must be moved or preferably discarded.
And was the bottle moved upon your suggestion?
The employee who I asked to kindly move the bottle stated that they would inform Mrs. Martini of my request. No further steps were taken that day, at least to my knowledge.
Thank you, Your Honor. No further questions at this time.
Any cross for this witness?
Yes, Your Honor. Mr. O'Keefe, you work for the FDA, right?
Yes, I do. Proudly so.
And part of your job at the FDA was to conduct investigations at Peony Estates, a winery in Midlands, right?
Yes, because I had considerable expertise since I've also conducted investigations into 170 other wineries.
That's right. And so one of those wineries that you investigated, Peony Estates, you went there on November 2015, right?
Yes, I did.
And when you went to Peony Estates in November 2015, you found no evidence of food or wine contamination by pesticides, right?
No, not at all. It was later in my other investigations that I found a considerable increase in pesticide usage.
Now, let's talk about some of those later investigations. Specifically, you went to Peony Estates in July 2018, right?
Yes, I did.
And now, when you went to Peony Estates in July 2018, you found that the pesticide storage was not in violation of FDA health codes, right?
Yes, the pesticide storage was not in violation, but it was a cause for concern.
Now, Mr. O'Keefe, I'm not asking you about whether it was a cause for concern. I'm simply asking whether the pesticide storage was in violation of FDA health codes. It wasn't, right?
It was not. However, if employees get lazy, they look for excuses for convenience. Pesticides entering winery production and bottling areas is a risk. So that's why we ask people to keep their sheds a minimum required distance away so that employees aren't prone to convenience.
Now, I appreciate that, Mr. O'Keefe, but just to clarify, that's a no to my question.
Yes.
Now, moving on to another visit that you conducted at Peony Estates. You went there in May 2019, right?
Yes, I did.
And that was an unscheduled visit.
Yes, it was.
Now, during that unscheduled visit, you put Peony Estates on probation, right?
Yes, I did, because there were 4 major health code violations, as I had earlier discussed.
Now, right, I want to talk about those 4 health violations. Because of those violations, you came back later that month.
Yes, I did.
And later that month, you found that those 4 violations had been rectified, right?
Objection, Your Honor. May I be heard? Pursuant to Special Instruction Number 7, the inspection of Riley Adkins O'Keefe on May 30th, 2019, if the plaintiff is pursuing negligence per se, is excluded from the case and cannot be used by either side.
Response?
Yes, Your Honor, one moment.
Plaintiff counsel, are they referring to the deposition of Harper Martini or the Riley Adkins O'Keefe report?
Are you speaking to?
Yes, I'm asking.
She was referring to the Riley Adkins O'Keefe report. There are 2 from May 2019, one in early May, I believe on the 8th, and one in late May on the 30th. And Special Instruction 7 specifically details the inspection from the 30th, which I believe opposing counsel was about to get into, considering she referred to the second inspection later though.
Defense counsel, are you going into the May 30th inspection?
Your Honor, I'm unable to see the special instructions. I would ask plaintiff counsel if those are included in the stipulations.
No, they are. The special instruction does say that, but are you going into the inspection on May 30th?
Yes, Your Honor, but I can move on.
Then I'll sustain.
Yes, Your Honor.
Now, Mr. O'Keefe, I want to talk specifically about this case. You don't know Genesis Petrillo, right?
Except the interactions I've had with her when I've inspected his winery? No, not really.
No, Mr. O'Keefe, I'm asking whether you know Genesis Petrillo.
Oh, I apologize. No, I do not know Genesis Petrillo.
That's right. You don't know Miss Petrillo, so you weren't at her wedding.
No, I was not. I was not invited.
And so, since you weren't there on the day of the wedding, you don't know whether there were any evidence of pesticide contamination on that day.
Well, people don't usually like to call FDA inspectors to a wedding, so no, not really.
Mr. O'Keefe, I'm not asking you about your perception of what people like. I'm simply asking, because you weren't at the wedding that day, you don't know of any health code violations on that day, right?
No, I would not. I'd only know if I could go and inspect now.
And you also don't know if there was any pesticide contamination on that day, right?
No, I do not.
And finally, Mr. O'Keefe, because you weren't at that wedding, you didn't see how much Genesis Petrillo had to drink that night.
No, I generally just don't participate in alcoholism because it is a dangerous practice. But yes, I do not know how much Genesis Petrillo drank that night.
Thank you. No further questions.
Any redirect?
None, Your Honor. I just ask that Mr. Adkins O'Keefe be able to be excused.
Mr. O'Keefe, you're excused. Are there any further witnesses from the plaintiff?
No, Your Honor. With that, the plaintiff rests our case in chief, and we are either ready to move on to the defense case in chief or willing to take a 5-minute recess or at your discretion.
We're going to take a 1-minute recess.
Sure.
So And then if we can get set up for the defense's first witness, that'd be great.
Yes, Your Honor.
Thank you. Are both parties back?
Yes, Your Honor. The defense is ready to proceed.
Let's wait for a plaintiff to turn on their camera. But you can call your first witness.
Yes, Your Honor. The plaintiff is ready to proceed as well.
Perfect.
At this time, the defense calls Casey Soto to the stand.
Proceed when ready.
Could you please introduce yourself to the jury?
Hi, my name is Casey Soto. My name is Casey Soto.
Why are you here today, Ms. Soto?
I'm here because my fiance, Genesis Petrillo, died the morning of our wedding.
I want to talk about your relationship with Miss Petrillo. How did the two of you meet?
I had actually heard about her before I met her, that she was just the life of the party and that I had to meet her. And I didn't believe anyone until I saw her. She just had this way of making me feel like you were the most important person in the room. And the moment I started talking to her, I just knew I never wanted to stop.
What was your relationship with Miss Petrillo like?
She was so loving and...
Response or basis?
Yeah, Your Honor, objection to relevance. Today, the plaintiff is pursuing a negligence per se case. And so we're looking at whether or not the Paoni estate was negligent in their handling of pesticides. This line of questioning about the relationship and between Genesis Petrillo and Casey Soto does not make any fact in this case more or less likely when it comes to whether or not Paoni Estates was negligent.
Final response?
Yes, Your Honor. This is relevant because this testimony lays the foundation for how Miss Soto and Miss Petrillo ended up having a relationship with Harper Martini, Casey's parent. And furthermore, this is Genesis Petrillo's fiance, and she should be allowed a little leeway to explain their relationship and how they came to get married.
Is Miss Soto a claimant in this case?
No, Your Honor.
She's not seeking mental anguish or loss of consortium, anything like that?
No, Your Honor.
Then I'm going to sustain.
Yes, Your Honor.
Strike.
Now, Miss Soto, who is your father?
My father is Harper Martini.
I want to talk a little bit about your relationship with your dad. How was your childhood growing up with Harper?
My mom died when I was really young, so it was really just me and my dad growing up, which meant that it was Dad and I playing Pretty Princess together. I will say he did look good with the earrings and jewelry and crown if he won. But I just saw how hard he worked to found Peony Estates. And he named it after my favorite flower also that we could have a better life. You know, he was the most important man in my life for so long, and I just I wanted him to get along with Genesis, the love of my life.
How did Genesis and your dad get along?
They didn't, to be honest.
What do you mean by that?
Objection, Your Honor. Again, to relevance.
Sustained.
Yes, Your Honor.
Now, Miss Soto, I want to talk about the events leading up to your wedding. Where was your wedding held?
My wedding was held at my dad's vineyard, Peony Estates. And even the rehearsal dinner, tastings, everything happened at Peony Estates.
Let's talk specifically about the rehearsal dinner.
Mhm.
How did that start?
It didn't start very well. You know, my Genesis, she showed up late, as she usually does. And my dad likes to run on a schedule, so they got into a fight in front of our wedding party.
Now, what was your reaction when your fiance and your dad got into a fight on the night of your wedding, the night before your wedding?
Objection, Your Honor. Again, to relevance.
Your Honor, may I be heard on this matter?
Briefly.
Yes, Your Honor. This night of the rehearsal dinner was the night that Genesis Petrillo drank the wine that was allegedly contaminated with pesticides. And so this line of testimony is relevant. And if I may proffer,
Yeah.
this witness will testify that this fight between Genesis Petrillo and Harper Martini led Genesis Petrillo to begin drinking throughout the night. And this is exactly the case of the matter at hand, because in order to prove negligence, the plaintiff has to prove that the negligence in fact caused harm to Miss Petrillo.
I'm going to give you a little leeway, but if it starts going too outside what could be reasonably related, then I'm going to sustain.
Yes, Your Honor.
Yes, Your Honor.
Miss Soto, what happened when Genesis and your dad got into a fight the night of the rehearsal dinner?
They were yelling at each other, and it really made me rethink having a wedding to begin with. I talked to Genesis about it and told her that I was thinking of calling off the wedding, and she was concerned and told me that the tension between her and my dad were really just getting to her, but that she loved me and still wanted to be with me. And she just reminded me how much I wanted to spend the rest of my life with her.
Objection, Your Honor. It's a hearsay to the statements from Harper Martini.
What was the statement?
It was about their love for his love for his daughter, I believe. Regardless, Harper Martini is the plaintiff's party opponent in today's case, and so pursuant to 801 D2D, her statements can be brought in by the plaintiff. However, because Harper Martini is not the party opponent of the defense in today's case, his statements, excuse me, are still considered hearsay and are inadmissible in court today.
Response.
Your Honor, yes, Your Honor. If I may clarify, those statements just elicited by Miss Soto were of Genesis Petrillo, and those statements are an exception to hearsay under Rule 8033. And these statements are statements of a mental feeling, and so the testimony that Genesis loved Casey is a mental feeling and is not hearsay.
Yeah, I agree. I'm going to overrule.
Yes, Your Honor.
Now, Miss Soto, what happened when you decided to continue on with the wedding?
Yeah, I talked to our wedding planner, Blair Osborne, about trying to keep my dad and Genesis as far away from each other as possible. I mean, Genesis kept making comments about calling off the wedding, and as much as I tried to reassure her, she likes to joke about serious topics, and I just saw that this really got under her skin.
Objection, Your Honor. Speculation.
Response.
Your Honor, this is not speculation because it goes to the witness's rationally based perception about what Genesis Petrillo was saying on the night of the rehearsal dinner. This witness testified that Genesis was making little comments and that she said that she was still thinking about calling off the wedding. Furthermore, Miss Soto was Miss Petrillo's fiance, and so she can speak about their relationship, and so this is not speculation.
If you could lay down the foundation besides just having her say that she saw that it annoyed her, if you could actually say like what she saw or how she looked angry, then I would allow it. But at this point, I'm going to sustain.
Yes, Your Honor.
Now, Miss Soto, how was Genesis acting throughout the rest of the rehearsal dinner?
She was shaking a little bit and kept looking around and looking at me, and she looked nervous and kept making these little comments about me calling off the wedding. And I tried to reassure her, but she looked at me with fear. And I could tell that my comment about calling off the wedding just...
Your Honor, again, speculation. This witness just testified that she looked at her with fear. Again, that is delving into the mindset of Genesis, saying that she is fearful and afraid.
Response.
Yes, Your Honor. Again, this is not speculation because this witness just testified that Miss Petrillo was shaking, she was looking around, she was making little comments. And again, this is Miss Petrillo's fiance, and so she's just testifying to her rationally based perception about what she thought her fiance was feeling.
Well, if she would have said she thought it looked like fear, then I would allow it. But I'm going to strike just that portion about her looking at her with fear.
Yes, Your Honor.
Sustained in part.
Now, Miss Soto, you told us that Genesis was shaking. You saw her looking around. What happened after this?
I was concerned about Genesis, but then my dad offered a peace offering to her.
What was that peace offering?
It was the first bottle of wine from his new collection. He doesn't give that to anyone. He normally saves that for him and my mom's wedding anniversary.
What was the name of that wine?
Cara. That was my mom's name.
Miss Soto, did you see your fiance drinking throughout the rehearsal dinner?
Yeah, she had a glass of champagne at the toast. She had a few glasses of the wine. I saw her go to the bar, and when I was leaving, I think she was rounding up people for another drinking game. I really hope that she wouldn't be too hungover for our ceremony.
No. Miss Soto, what happened when you woke up on your wedding day?
Yeah, I woke up at 7 and I got my makeup done and my hair done, and I was getting on my dress when my dad came in to see me.
What was that meeting with your dad like?
It was really special. When he saw me, he started to tear up, and then I warned him that if he started tearing up, then I would tear up, and I didn't want to have to redo my makeup again.
Your Honor.
There's an objection.
Objection to relevance, Your Honor. Again, as previously stated, the plaintiff is pursuing negligence per se, and this conversation or interaction between Harper Martini and Casey Soto does not make any facts in today's negligence case more or less likely.
Your objection is noted but overruled.
Yes, Your Honor.
No. Miss Soto, I'll ask again. What was that meeting with your dad like?
You know, he came in and saw me and started to tear up, and I warned that if he started tearing up, then I would start tearing up, and I didn't want to ruin my makeup. So once we both had tissues, he asked if I was nervous or if I had heard from my wife to be yet.
And had you heard from Genesis that morning?
No, I hadn't heard from Genesis yet, and I told Dad that, and he made a comment about postponing the wedding, but I knew that Genesis wouldn't be late for the start of our new lives together.
Soto, did you have the ceremony that day?
No, we didn't. Soon after that, Angel, one of Genesis' groomsmen, came in and mentioned something about Genesis and a coma, and my world just stopped.
Miss Soto, when you heard that your fiance might be in a coma, what did you do?
I couldn't think, I couldn't breathe. I didn't even have time to get on my wedding dress. I just knew that I needed to get to Genesis as fast as I could.
Did you get to Genesis?
No, by the time we got to the hospital, it was too late. Genesis had passed away. If If we had gotten there 5 minutes earlier, I could have said goodbye.
Thank you, Ms. Soto. Nothing further, Your Honor.
Cross.
Yes, Your Honor. Good afternoon, Ms. DeSoto. How are you doing today?
Not the best, I'm not gonna lie.
I just have a couple of questions for you. So, Ms. Soto, you originally planned to have your wedding at Rosie and Pedro, right?
Yeah, we were gonna have that there.
But then your dad actually offered to fund a large portion of the wedding if you agreed to hold it at Paoni Estates.
Yeah, he was generous enough to have it at his vineyard.
Right. And so after that, you did switch your wedding to Paoni.
Yes, we did.
And you were aware of the financial issues with Paoni. Right?
Yeah, and my dad thought that it would be good advertising to have another wedding there.
Due to some massive leaks in the storage barn.
I'm sorry, what was that?
The storage barn. You knew that there were some financial difficulties due to the massive leaks in the storage barn, right?
That's what my dad told me.
Right. And you're aware of what's inside the storage barn, right, Ms. Soto?
Yeah, it was a bunch of equipment.
Right. There's landscaping tools.
Yes.
The extra like wiring, cleaning supplies.
Yeah.
And pesticides, right?
Yeah, those were for outside, yeah.
Yeah. And your dad refused to relocate them. That's right.
I'm pretty sure he always kept them in that shed. And it was far enough from the property that it was okay.
So Ms. Soto, that's a yes that your father refused to relocate the pesticides from the storage barn.
Yeah, the storage barn was a good place to keep them.
And just to backtrack a little bit, you said you were aware of the massive leaks in the storage barn, right?
Yeah, like cleaning supplies and all that stuff.
Now, so your father refused to relocate them, but that's despite of Paoni having a bad inspection record, right?
Yeah, I know there was an
Objection, Your Honor, to lack of foundation.
To what?
To whether or not Ms. Soto knows about the inspections that occurred in any states.
Sorry, you kind of broke up there. Could you say that one more time?
Yes, Your Honor. The objection was to lack of foundation as to whether or not Ms. Soto knows about inspections that were held at Peony Estates. No foundation has been laid that Ms. Soto is aware of these inspections and whether she's aware of the results of these inspections.
Brief response.
Your Honor, this witness has already testified that they are familiar with the financial issues of Paoni Estates as well as the leaks in the storage barn, and it is clear that they have a close relationship with their father regarding the business practices of Paoni Estates. Therefore, it is not unreasonable that this witness would indeed have the information about these bad inspections in the past.
Yeah, I agree. If the witness doesn't know, she can say she doesn't know. So I'm going to overrule.
Yes, Your Honor.
Yes, Your Honor. So, Ms. Soto, again, your father refused to relocate the pesticides despite the bad inspection record at Paoni?
No, he kept them in the shed, yeah.
So that's a yes that he refused to relocate them from the leaking storage barn?
Yeah, there wasn't an issue with it.
And on the night of the rehearsal dinner, you saw your dad present Genesis with a bottle of wine, right?
Yeah, he did.
And on direct examination, you actually said that it was the bottle of Cara wine, that's right?
Yeah, it was the first bottle of his new collection.
And you would recognize that bottle if I showed it to you today in court?
Of course I would.
One moment while I pull this up. And Ms. Soto, this is the bottle of Cara wine that was gifted to Genesis Petrillo by Harper Martini?
Yeah, it is.
Thank you, Your Honor. No further questions.
Any redirect?
No redirect, Your Honor. I just asked that the witness be allowed to be excused.
Ms. Soto, you're excused. Are there any further witnesses for the defense?
Yes, Your Honor. One moment.
Can you call the witness and then just switch out?
Yes, Your Honor. At this time, the defense calls Blair Osborne to the stand.
Your Honor, is everyone ready to proceed?
Plaintiff, you Plaintiff counsel, ready?
Yes, Your Honor.
Please go ahead.
Please introduce yourself to the court.
Hi, my name is Blair Osborne.
What do you do for a living, Miss Osborne?
Well, I'm the CEO, CFO, administrative assistant, and IT support for the one and only Bliss by Blair.
What exactly is Bliss by Blair?
We make dreams come true on the biggest day of every couple's life. I'm a wedding planner, so destination weddings, traditional weddings, whatever my client wants, they're gonna get.
How did you get involved in wedding planning?
It's a funny story, actually. See, I was a bridesmaid for my friends so many times. And I mean, I've seen it all. Caterers burning the food, groomsmen forgetting their socks. I mean, my friends were asking for me to handle these logistics and hiccups so often that I figured I might as well get paid for it.
Do you know a person named Harper Martini?
I do, yeah. Harper runs a bed and breakfast called Peony Estates. The ambiance, the wine, I mean, 10 out of 10. It's picture perfect for a wedding. I've worked with Peony Estates and Harper on over 80 events. And she even asked me to help plan her daughter Casey's wedding, and it was a real honor.
Now, Miss Osborne, I want to talk about these 80 events. During all these occasions where you were working with Peony Estates, did you ever witness any health code violations?
No, I didn't. I mean, I have pretty high standards when it comes to the venues I hold my weddings at, and if I had seen anything that I was uncomfortable with, I would not be bringing my clients to such a place.
Objection, Your Honor. Character evidence. They're using past examples of Peony Estates cleanliness to potentially prove future cleanliness, which is inadmissible per Rule 404.
Your Honor, may I respond to that?
Yes.
So the plaintiff's whole case under the FDA inspector, Riley Atkins O'Keefe, by that argument, would all be irrelevant testimony that should all be stricken, because all of Riley Atkins O'Keefe's testimony was testifying to potential previous health violations, previous practices. That was the whole plaintiff's case argument, was past cases. And so the defense should be allowed to put in countering evidence there. It also, there's no character trait that has been elicited.
Was there a rebuttal witness testimony form notice in this case?
No, there was no, the plaintiff did not offer an intent to offer.
A notice of intent to offer character evidence, was that?
The plaintiff did not submit any to us.
Okay. Does character evidence apply, plaintiff counsel, does character evidence apply to corporations?
Your Honor, I believe so, but also just as a brief response, I'm mainly indicting Ms. Osborne's statement that they wouldn't host an event there if it wasn't clean. Clearly, this is indicating a form of past trait or at least observation to prove future observations, which is inadmissible.
I'm going to disagree and overrule.
Ms. Osborne, during these past 80 events that you hosted with Peony Estates, did you ever notice any health code violations?
No, I didn't. Like I said, I loved working with Peony Estates. They were always up to my standards, and they always put on a really great event for my clients, which I'm thankful for.
During these past 80 events, did you ever see any mishandling of pesticides?
No, I did not.
So I want to talk about the wedding between Genesis Petrillo and Casey Soto. You mentioned that you planned that wedding?
Yes, I was involved with the planning, and like I said, I was really honored to be asked to be part of Harper's family like that.
Did you encounter any problems planning that wedding?
Well, see, there's always problems in the wedding planning industry. I mean, dealing with stressed out bridezillas and wrangling drunk family members is basically a part of the job description. And Harper and Genesis were particularly uncooperative during the process. They were constantly fighting.
Now, Miss Osborne, were you there on the night of the wedding rehearsal?
Yes, I was.
Now, when you were there on the night of the wedding rehearsal, did you ever see any mishandling of pesticides that night?
No, I didn't. I was there that night to make sure logistically everything was going picture perfect And from what I saw, everything was fine that night.
Did you see any other health code violations that night?
No, I didn't.
Miss Osborne, I want to talk a little bit about Genesis Trio that night. Did you see her consume any alcohol?
Yeah, I saw Genesis consuming alcohol. She drank from a bottle of wine. She was at the bar that evening with her friends, and she was definitely having a rowdy night.
Do you know how much she drank that night?
I don't know exactly how much. All I know is that I saw her drinking the wine, and I saw her hanging out at home at the bar much of the night. I was a little worried just about dealing with a hungover bride the next day because it can get a little nasty, but overall, I just told her to be safe and make sure to drink some water.
Now, did the wedding occur that next day?
No, it didn't. I showed up bright and early that morning to get started on everything, and that was when we found out that Genesis was in a coma.
Now, Miss Osborne, you mentioned that you said goodnight to Genesis Trio and told her to drink plenty of water. Did you ever see her again after that point?
No. She died on the morning of the wedding. It was absolutely heartbreaking.
Thank you, Miss Osborne. I have no further questions.
Any cross for this witness?
Yes, Your Honor. May I proceed?
Please do.
So, Miss Osborne, you've held over 80 events at Peony Estates, is that correct?
Yes, I have.
So you have very close ties to these estates, correct?
To Peony Estates?
Correct.
I've held a lot of events there, and they've all went really smoothly. And typically when a place is so easy to work with, I like to keep going back because I know my standards are being met.
All right, so you consider your relationship with Miss Martini to be like family, yes?
I considered that we had a really, really good relationship with each other. And by her asking me to help plan Casey's wedding, that definitely did feel like a family moment.
All right, and you were hired for your services for Casey and Genesis's wedding, yes?
Yes.
And in doing so, Miss Martini hired you to plan for this particular event, correct?
Yeah, I planned Casey and Genesis's wedding, yes.
And in doing so, Mr. Martini promised you an extra 15%, is that correct?
For planning the wedding?
Yes.
Yeah, and I offered her a discount on top of that.
For you to keep your services discreet, correct?
Yes, like a surprise wedding. And I've never really done anything like that before, so I was a little nervous because I don't know if you can tell, sometimes I can be a blabbermouth, and I was a little worried that things were going to get out of hand and I was going to slip up and say something, but thank goodness I didn't.
I would like to move on. So your relationship with Peony Estates has been profitable for you, yes?
Yes, like I said, I've hosted some really great events there.
And a shutdown of Peony Estates would have a negative effect on your business, correct?
I mean, absolutely. I just have to shift over a lot of my things.
All right, so let's move on. You agree that planning this wedding was chaos, yes?
Planning any wedding is chaos, to be quite honest with you, but this wedding was definitely not chaotic.
And it was the worst professional experience of your life, yes?
Considering Ms. Petrillo passed away, yeah, it was not in my top 10.
But also that the theme was crying and fighting, yes?
Yeah, and I don't know if you've ever seen an episode of like Big Greek Wedding or Say Yes to the Dress. I mean, the theme is always crying. And you would never think that about a wedding, right? It's supposed to be happy. Who's to say?
But you decided to plan for this wedding even though you knew it would be a mess, correct?
Well, that's my job. My job is to try to make the best situation out of whatever cards I'm dealt with.
But particularly because you have close ties with Harper Martini's family, correct?
Absolutely. I wanted to be part of that special day.
All right, let's move on. In May, you met with Mr. Martini to discuss decor options, correct?
Yes.
And in the middle of the meeting, Mr. Martini received a phone call.
Yes.
And Mr. Martini told the person on the other end of the call, I don't care what that clown Adkins O'Keefe says. Do not waste the employees' time with more training. Is that correct?
That's what she said, yeah.
And then she said, no, keep the bottle of Cara wine where it is.
Yep.
Then no, don't have them move the pesticides.
That's what I heard.
No further questions, Your Honor.
Any redirect?
Briefly, Your Honor.
Briefly.
Ms. Osborne, you were talking about how you overheard this phone call and where pesticides were supposed to be left where they were, right?
Yeah.
Now, did you know if the pesticides were in an improper spot?
No, I didn't know anything about them.
Did you know anything else about the context of that phone call?
No, I was just there to discuss floral arrangements, and I wanted peonies, but I wasn't sure what Harper wanted.
Did you ever hear Harper Martini say anything about violating any health codes?
No.
I have no further questions.
Any recross?
No, Your Honor.
Okay, Ms. Osborne, you can step down. Does the defense have any other witnesses?
Yes, Your Honor. We call Dr. Cannon to the stand.
One moment, Your Honor, while we change the name.
How long did that take?
I didn't hit the time. Change your name.
And I think someone isn't muted.
Your Honor, we call Dr. Cannon to the stand.
Proceed when ready.
Yes, Your Honor. My apologies, I was popping out of the Zoom participants button. Can you introduce yourself to the members of the jury?
Hello, my name is Dr. Reed Cannon.
What's your occupation, Dr. Cannon?
I'm a medical consultant that specializes in toxicology and pharmacology.
Doctor, you mentioned the word toxicology. What exactly does that mean?
Well, toxicology is the study of chemicals and their effects on the human body. It's particularly negative. Back when I taught first-year med students, I always used to say, our job is to give scientific credence to the mantra, better out than in.
Doctor, do you have any previous experience in toxicology?
Absolutely. I was the chief toxicologist at Massachusetts General. I taught several courses on the intersectionality between law and toxicology at Midlands Medical Center before joining my consulting firm.
What's your educational background?
I got my undergraduate's degree from The Ohio State University and my medical degree from Harvard.
And how did you become involved in this particular case?
My firm was hired to review the reports in Miss Genesis Petrio's death provided by Dr. Kwan.
And when you're reviewing reports in your consulting firm, what methods do you use to come to a conclusion?
Well, my methods look surprisingly similar to any other medical professional. It starts with reviewing facts and data, and from that drawing conclusions and making diagnoses of patients. The main difference is that then you take this data and you compare that with the primary physician, in this case, Dr. Kwan, to look and match up the data or see if any mistakes have been made.
Is that a reliable method?
Absolutely.
And did you reliably apply it to the facts of this case?
Without doubt.
And did you have sufficient facts and data to make an opinion?
Absolutely.
Now, doctor, specifically, what exactly did you believe about this case?
Well, my firm was hired to look at the cause of death. It's always the million-dollar question in cases like these. And so we looked into it and basically saw if Dr. Kwan was right.
So, doctor, the million-dollar question is cause of death. Were you able to determine what it was?
Yes, without question, the cause of death is respiratory arrest. But what gets contentious is what exactly caused this sort of lung failure.
Were you able to determine what could have caused it?
Not exactly. You see, there's a myriad of other possibilities in this case, but I focused on primarily alcohol poisoning.
Doctor, why did you focus on alcohol poisoning?
Well, in my time in the field, I've seen numerous cases of alcohol poisoning and know it's incredibly common that it causes respiratory arrest. This combined with the medical symptoms that Mrs. Petrillo showed upon admittance to the hospital meant that alcohol poisoning was a surefire question on my mind. In fact, I've actually brought a board along to display some of these symptoms.
All right, doctor, we will display a visual aid. Now, doctor, I heard you mention symptoms of alcohol poisoning. What are these symptoms?
Well, these symptoms are primarily nausea, vomiting, slurred speech, slowed breathing, and stomach pain. And what was suspicious about this is that Mrs. Petrillo exhibited all of these symptoms upon admittance to the hospital.
Doctor, is there anything else that made you think it could be alcohol poisoning?
Yes. Additionally, with those symptoms, there's the issue of her BAC, which Dr. Kwan provided.
What was that BAC?
At the time it was measured at 3 a.m., the BAC was a 0.16.
Thank you. You can unshare that screen. Doctor, is a BAC of 0.16 high enough to cause respiratory failure from alcohol poisoning?
No, but what's important to understand is that this was likely not the peak BAC of Mrs. Petrillo that night. In fact, 911 was called at 12:40 that night, and nearly 2 or 3 hours later is only when we received that BAC number. Knowing this and the fact that it was still at a 0.16, I knew we couldn't rule it out.
Doctor, I want to take a step back. You mentioned that that may not have been her peak BAC. Could you describe exactly how BAC works and how it could change?
Well, BAC stands for blood alcohol concentration, and this is the amount of alcohol in your body. 0.1 BAC measures up to 1 part alcohol for 1,000 parts blood. Now, how it works is essentially like this. When you begin drinking, it spikes rapidly. And then, as you continue drinking, it will increase. Only when you stop drinking will it begin to decrease as your liver breaks it down. And in fact, sorry.
Oh, continue, sorry.
I was just going to say I've brought a graph along to explain this.
Your Honor, can we screen share a visual aid?
Any objection?
None, Your Honor.
Go ahead.
Now, doctor, can you explain how BAC can decline over time?
Yes. As your liver kicks it into high gear, alcohol is reduced to its components of acetane, carbon dioxide, and water. And so after several hours have passed, the BAC often drops by several decimals.
Thank you. You can unshare that screen. Now, doctor, based on your investigation and your knowledge of when BAC was taken, do you believe that 0.16 was Genesis Petrillo's peak BAC?
Absolutely not. And knowing when this measurement was taken, I absolutely couldn't rule out alcohol poisoning in this case. If her BAC approached and spiked anywhere close to a 0.3 or even more than that, then respiratory arrest would be an incredibly common symptom.
Now, doctor, I just want to ask briefly about some testing that was done.
Yes.
Are you aware of anything that was tested for pesticides at the estate?
Yes, several things were tested from pesticides, including a wine bottle, food, and other various things around the estate.
Well, what tested positive for pesticides?
To my knowledge, there is only one thing that tested positive for pesticides, and this was the wine bottle.
And doctor, what opinion can you draw about this, based on your consulting experience in toxicology?
Well, the thing about organophosphates is that when you have an outbreak, they kind of get all over the place. So to have this one single contamination in a huge winery is unheard of.
I have nothing further, Your Honor.
Any cross?
Yes, Your Honor. So, Dr. Cannon, I'd like to start with your background.
Yes.
You work for Gardner Consulting.
That's correct. It's a consulting firm based out of Beverly Hills.
And one of Gardner's biggest clients is Detsky Roach and Rodent Killer.
That's correct.
Now, Detsky makes chemical pesticides, correct?
That's true, but they're not the type of chemical pesticides that were found in today's case.
Does the CEO of this company know you're involved in this case?
I believe so.
Right. In fact, the CEO of Detsky directly told you that it is extremely important, if you want to continue to have their business, that a pesticide not be found responsible for Ms. Petrio's death, correct?
Your Honor, I would object to hearsay.
Yes, Your Honor. We are not using this statement to show the truth of the matter asserted, which is an essential component of hearsay. Rather, we are using it to show the effect on the listener.
May I be heard, Your Honor? Your Honor, they are absolutely using it for the truth of the matter asserted, that it is in fact extremely important for pesticides not to be found responsible in this case. That is the truth of the matter asserted, and that's what counsel is using it for.
May I briefly respond, Your Honor? You're muted, Your Honor.
My bad. I was saying there's no need. I'm going to overrule. It does seem to me to be effect on the listener.
Yes, Your Honor.
So, Dr. Cannon, the CEO of Detsky directly told you that it is extremely important, if you want to continue to have their business, that a pesticide not be found responsible for Ms. Petrio's death.
I'm afraid there's some misunderstanding about my job. You see, my job as a medical consultant is to draw in the facts and data and make conclusions to a reasonable degree of scientific certainty. Whether or not big corporations want me to make a conclusion or not is almost entirely irrelevant to me, as the fact is that somebody always wants you to say something. What's most important to me is science.
Yes, Dr. Cannon, but that is a yes to my question. You were told this?
Sure.
And you do not want to lose Detsky as a client, do you?
I don't really care, to be completely honest.
Is it your sworn testimony that you do not care if you lose Detsky as a client?
Of course it would be bad for my firm, but I'm here to deliver the truth. And if the truth doesn't line up with what Detsky wants, then I'm still going to say it anyways.
But that's a yes to my question.
Sure, it would be bad for my firm.
All right, now I'd like to move on to your analysis of alcohol and organophosphate pesticide poisoning regarding the death of Genesis Petrio. First, you agree that the facts of the case are consistent with Petrio's death being caused by consuming wine containing organophosphate pesticide, correct?
Yes, but this is one of my favorite cases I've seen in a while because of, in a way, the collage of different options here. It's almost frustrating. You see, Genesis exhibited symptoms of alcohol poisoning, pesticide poisoning, possibly allergic reactions, or hepatic disease. It's all sort of like everything almost has like a 20% chance of happening. Now, does this mean that yes, some things are slightly higher than 20%, say 25, 26%? Yes. Does it mean that they are reasonable to conclude in scientific certainty? Absolutely not. And so that was my conclusion in today's case.
But Dr. Cannon, can you actually conclude that Petrio's peak BAC could have been high enough for it to be alcohol poisoning?
I unfortunately can't give you the exact number of Ms. Petrio's BAC. What I can tell you is that BAC spikes and that it certainly could have gotten that high.
Thank you, Dr. Cannon. But Petrio's peak BAC that night was 0.16, yes.
That is absolutely incorrect.
The BAC that was tested that night, the only actual BAC number that you have for Petrio is 0.16.
This was taken 3 hours after. As I've explained, this was not the peak BAC. But yes, when it was measured, it was still 0.16.
And the lowest BAC you've seen for an alcohol fatality is 0.30.
Yes, absolutely.
Now, Dr. Cannon, you have no affirmative evidence to back up that her BAC could have been high enough for an alcohol poisoning.
That's false.
Dr. Cannon, is it your sworn testimony that you have affirmative evidence to claim that her peak BAC could have been high enough for alcohol poisoning?
My evidence is science.
Counsel's burden shifting?
In what way?
Your Honor, counsel specifically asking a defense witness for affirmative evidence of his theory when it's their job to provide affirmative evidence, the question as phrased is more prejudicial than probative because it shifts the burden to the defense.
Was there any response, counsel?
Yes, Your Honor. Opposing counsel's entire direct examination of this witness was going to try and prove that there's a possibility that Petrillo could have died due to alcohol poisoning. I am attacking the credibility of this argument that they made within their direct examination in order to lay foundation for the fact that it is most likely that Ms. Petrillo's death was caused by pesticide poisoning.
Your Honor, may I be heard?
Briefly.
Your Honor, my objection wasn't to relevance. It was specifically that the phrasing of the question is more prejudicial than probative because it shifts the burden.
I'm going to disagree. Defense has put on its case theory, and it seems like she's simply attacking any evidence of that case theory. So I'm going to overrule.
Yes, Your Honor.
So, Dr. Cannon, you have no affirmative evidence to say that Petrillo's peak BAC could have been high enough for alcohol poisoning.
Again, that is false.
Dr. Cannon, you are aware that you prepared a report for today's case?
Yes, you see, the evidence that I have is science. It's Widmark's equation, and it is a fundamental understanding of BAC. Understanding that BAC spikes and how it does is exactly the evidence that I need to conclude that it could have been high enough to cause this.
Dr. Cannon, would you recognize a copy of your report if I was to show you in court today?
Sure.
Your Honor, I am now sharing my screen with Dr. Cannon's report. I would like to note this is my personal copy, so there are highlights made, but no other changes have been made to the report. And additionally, I am willing to remove these highlights.
Could you just tell opposing counsel what lines you're referring to as well?
Yes, Your Honor. I will be referring to lines 73 to 76 of the report. May I share my screen, Your Honor?
Yes.
Can you see the document?
No.
I'm sorry, I'm unable to see the document.
Okay, there it is. Can you see it now?
Yes, I can see.
Okay, the lines that I'm referring to are right here, 73 to 76. Now, Dr. Cannon, here, I can scroll up to the bottom so that, can you identify this document for me?
This is the report I prepared.
Yes, and that's your signature at the bottom, correct?
That is correct.
And if we are constructively redacting all highlights, this is a fair and accurate copy?
Besides the highlights, yes.
All right, now I would like to direct your attention to 73 to 76. You said, unfortunately, without a full accounting of every alcoholic beverage that Petrillo consumed that evening, including times, amounts, and percentage of alcohol, it is impossible to determine what Petrillo's peak BAC was that evening.
Your Honor, I'd object to hearsay at this point.
On what grounds?
Your Honor, this is a prior statement of this witness. It's an out-of-court statement being used for the truth. Now, counsel can use the witness's prior testimony to impeach the witness if there has been a contradiction. But specifically, there has been no contradiction. Counsel's question was, do you have any affirmative evidence that her BAC could have been high enough to cause alcohol poisoning? The line she's reading is that he doesn't know the exact number of what her peak BAC was, which he said multiple times. He said,
I'm sorry.
He said, I don't know the exact number, but I can tell you that it could have been high enough to cause alcohol poisoning. There's no inconsistency. If there's no inconsistency, it's hearsay.
Your Honor, if I may briefly.
Final response.
I would also like to direct attention to lines 81 to 83, and also state that the witness did not say that it is possible. The witness said that he would not say that he did not have affirmative evidence. I cited the wrong lines. I would like to remand my impeachment to lines 81 to 83. May I read those aloud?
Well, since you just kind of gave in and said that you read the wrong lines, I'm going to sustain the motion and strike this portion of the testimony. If you'd like to impeach on these other lines, feel free to go ahead.
Yes, Your Honor. Dr. Cannon, you prepared a report.
Yes, I believe we're looking at it.
Yes, and you had up until trial to make any edits, correct?
Absolutely.
And this appears to be your report.
This is my report.
The signature was at the bottom,
Of course.
and it's a fair and accurate copy redacting the highlights.
It is.
All right, please read along with me as I read aloud 80 to 83. I have never seen an alcohol poisoning fatality connected with a BAC lower than 0.3. While it is possible, there is no affirmative evidence or scientific basis that would support a conclusion that Petrio's peak BAC was at least 0.3% or that it even approached that number. Did I read that correctly?
That is correct. It is possible.
All right, now to finish, I would like to ask you final 3 questions about what you find to be most likely. Now, you think that respiratory arrest was the most likely cause of Petrio's death, correct?
Respiratory arrest is not in contention. It was what killed Genesis Petrio that night.
And you also find that the cause of this respiratory arrest is most likely isophenphos organophosphate pesticide poisoning.
Yes, and what we're understanding this to be is most likely is very different from scientifically certain, or even more likely than not. What we're talking about is multiple options, pesticides, poisoning, alcohol, all of these combined, say a 20 to 30% chance of being true. Is organic.
Dr. Cannon. And
I'm sorry, that's time.
I'm going to let you finish that question.
Thank you, Your Honor. And finally, you believe that the most likely cause of the isophenphos organophosphate pesticide poisoning is the wine produced by Peony Estates, correct?
That is false.
Is there any redirect for this witness?
One question, Your Honor.
You get one question.
Doctor, briefly, is the most likely cause the same as it being more likely than not?
No, not in the slightest.
Your Honor, I have nothing further.
All right, thank you, and thank you, Dr. Cannon. Are there any further witnesses for the defense?
Your Honor, the defense rests our case in chief.
And we are going to go straight into closings.
Yes, Your Honor. One moment while we switch out our attorneys.
Yeah, go ahead. Is the plaintiff closing ready to proceed? You're muted.
Thank you. Yes, Your Honor. Is defense ready for me to proceed? Does that matter?
Yes, Your Honor, we're all ready to proceed.
And plaintiff, you have the floor.
Yes, Your Honor. May it please the court, opposing counsel, members of the jury. When a winery has a slew of FDA violations and mishandling of poison, it is no surprise when something goes wrong. And indeed, something did go wrong. Because on the day of her wedding, Miss Genesis Petrio died from pesticide poisoning caused by the consumption of Peony Estates wine. That is why the plaintiff is before you today, bearing the burden of proof, to prove to you as members of the jury that Peony Estates was negligent in their handling of pesticides, and that negligence caused the death of Genesis Petrio. Now, as I said, the plaintiff holds the burden of proof today. That burden is that the plaintiff must prove to you by a preponderance of the evidence that we have met our burden and that you believe that Genesis Petrillo's death was caused by pesticide poisoning due to the negligence of Peony Estates. But let's break that burden down a bit more. So our burden is to prove to you by a preponderance of the evidence. Now, what that means is that we must show you that it is more likely than not that Genesis's death is the result of Peony Estate's negligent behavior. That means if at the end of the trial today, the scales have just barely tipped in our favor, then it is your duty to find the defendant, Peony Estates, liable for negligence. And members of the jury, the plaintiff has met our burden of proof in this case today. We met that burden by calling to the stand 3 witnesses. Now, you first heard from Lonnie Paris. Lonnie Paris took the stand and told you about the investigation he took into Peony Estates over the course of several years. And at the end of his testimony, Mr. Paris said that he leaves his readers to connect the dots. Well, members of the jury, I'm here to connect those dots for you. Now, what Mr. Paris found is that Peony Estates had a pest problem. In fact, you heard it from Peony Estates agents themselves. You saw a memo from winemaker Austin Lewis, who said that they needed to deal with pests now and that they needed to spray their entire facility with pesticides quickly and cheaply, and that nothing else mattered. Nothing else mattered to Peony Estates except that they use their pesticides cheaply and quickly. But pesticides are a poison. And as you heard from Danny Francasio, they must be dealt with carefully, because if they are negligently used, they can cause death. And that is what we saw in this tragic case today. Furthermore, you heard from both Riley and Lonnie that the pesticides that were used at Peony Estates were stored improperly. They were found in the bottling area, directly next to bottles of wine. In fact, both Lonnie and Riley O'Keefe saw the bottle of 2019 Carl wine directly next to an empty canister of pesticides. And what you heard later on in trial is that Genesis Petrillo, the night of her poisoning, drank a 2019 Carl wine, a wine that had been sitting directly next to an empty pesticide container, a wine that was produced by a facility that was constantly engaging in FDA violations by their lazy employees who chose not to store their pesticides properly, but instead stored them in the bottling area near the wine, which is illegal. You heard all of this today, and that is why this proves that Peony Estates was negligent in their handling of pesticides. But furthermore, the plaintiff needs to prove that this negligence caused the death of Genesis Petrillo. And that was proven as well. You heard Lonnie Paris say that he took the bottle of 2019 Carl wine that Genesis drank and tested it for pesticide poison. And what did he find? High levels of isofenphos organophosphate poisoning in that same bottle of wine. In fact, he also retrieved the death certificate of Miss Petrillo, which further proves that her death was caused by pesticide poisoning. This death certificate states that she was killed by pesticide poisoning, likely caused by the result of contaminated, poisoned wine. Furthermore, Genesis's blood work and stomach contents proved that she had been contaminated with pesticides. There is a clear line between the dots here, members of the jury. The plaintiff has proven by a preponderance of the evidence that Peony Estates was negligent in their handling of pesticides, and that negligence caused the death of a young woman, Genesis Petrillo. And that is why the plaintiff has met our burden of proof today, and I ask you to find the defendant, Peony Estates, liable for negligence. Thank you.
Thank you. Closing for the defense.
Yes, Your Honor. As we close out today's trial, members of the jury, you should be asking yourself one key question. Why did no one else die? If pesticides were all over Peony Estates, if they were negligently handled, if there was improper use of pesticides, why did it only affect Genesis Petrillo? Why was she the only one that was poisoned? It doesn't make any sense at all. And the reason why it doesn't make sense is because the plaintiff picked the wrong poison. They honed in on pesticide. That is what their witnesses focused on exclusively. In fact, many of the witnesses focused on that because they have bias. But what they ignored was alcohol, which also is a poison. Members of the jury, the defense has no burden in today's case. The plaintiff has the burden. It never left their shoulders. And what they have to show to you is that it is more likely than not that not only did Peony Estates act negligently and violate health codes, but also that that violation was the specific cause of Genesis Petrillo's death. They failed in both of these respects. First, let's talk about health code violations. Because what you will see in today's case is that ultimately there was no evidence that Peony Estates actually violated any health codes. They pointed to suppositions, they pointed to guesses, but ultimately no one was actually able to show you a concrete letter of the law where they violated a health code. Now let's talk about that. We are focused on whether or not there was a health code violation on the day of the incident. Riley Adkins O'Keefe, the investigator, came up, he took the stand, and he explained that a lot of Peony Estates' practices were good. And he also said he thought they made some mistakes in certain respects, but ultimately took them off probationary status and certified them as a safe establishment to sell wine. And what's crucial is Mr. O'Keefe was not there on the day of the incident. He never investigated the facilities on June 9th. And because he was not there, he can't testify to any violations at all. And so that witness was not able to establish that on June 9th, at the day of the wedding rehearsal, there was a health code violation. Same thing with Danny Francasio. Ms. Francasio was not able to show a violation of health code. She was not there on the day of the wedding rehearsal. Ms. Francasio was very, very biased in her assessments. You saw how she referred to Harper Martini as a cellar rat. She was one of the largest competitors to Peony Estates. She viewed Harper Martini as taking some of her business as a personal betrayal. She was not a credible witness. And then you heard from Lonnie Paris, who put a stake in his entire journalism career on this one case, a case that he pursued single-mindedly for several years. One where his journalism career, his job, is conditionally offered on how much attention he can draw readers in to this story. So Mr. Paris has every incentive to make this case a story, to make it one of pesticides rather than alcohol, and a case that's specifically related to Genesis Petrillo, because otherwise his whole work would be undermined. And also, Mr. Paris never actually testified to any violations. He testified that he saw a bottle of wine at the wedding rehearsal dinner, but never saw any pesticides go into it. He never saw any open pesticides. He testified to you that he only saw an empty bottle of pesticides. But an empty bottle of pesticides is not a health code violation. And also, he was never able to show any linking evidence at all that the pesticides in that bottle ever got into the wine. Never explained how any pesticides got into any food or drink. And what's important to remember, members of the jury, is that if Peony Estates was negligent, if they were irresponsible, if they were spraying pesticides everywhere, well, it makes no sense why only Genesis Petrillo would be the person that was sickened at the night of the wedding rehearsal. You would expect a lot more fatalities. You would expect a lot more sicknesses, but it was only Genesis. Now, let's ask ourselves why it was only Genesis. We ultimately don't know why she died. Mr. Paris pointed to a death certificate, and opposing counsel mentioned this death certificate. But the death certificate was only written by human beings, by a Dr. Kwan, who never took the stand. The plaintiff never called Dr. Kwan to the stand to explain why she made the findings she did. And Dr. Cannon took the stand to explain to you exactly why that's problematic. He explained to you about how a lot of symptoms of alcohol poisoning were ignored. The fact is that a person can die of alcohol poisoning, and that Ms. Petrillo had a significant amount of alcohol the night of the rehearsal dinner. She had much more to drink than other members of the party, and it explained why she came down with poisoning and none of the other guests did. You heard testimony from Lonnie Paris that she was drinking the night of the wedding and appeared very disoriented on the dance floor. You heard from Casey Soto, the spouse of Genesis Petrillo, that Ms. Petrillo was consuming several drinks that night, was drinking champagne, was drinking wine, went over to the bar for drinking games. You heard from Blair Osborne that she was worried about a severe hangover, cautioned Ms. Petrillo to drink plenty of water. There is plenty of evidence linking Ms. Petrillo to having consumed a lot of alcohol that night. And ultimately, it is more likely that alcohol was the cause of Ms. Petrillo's death than pesticides. They were never able to prove a violation. You heard from Ms. Osborne that she hosted over 80 successful events with Peony Estates. And in all those 80 events, and also in the night in question, she never saw any mishandling of pesticides, and she never saw any health code violations. What this case comes down to is the plaintiff picking the wrong poison. They honed in on pesticides because they had a specific narrative that they wanted to follow. Ms. Francasio wanted Peony Estates' professional reputation to suffer, and Lonnie Paris wanted to build his journalism career. But ultimately, they did not build their case around the facts. And the facts point to the wrong poison. They point to alcohol. And for that reason, we ask you,
Your Honor, that's time.
We ask you to find Harper Martini not liable. Thank you.
Thank you, counsel. Any rebuttal?
Yes, Your Honor.
Proceed.
Opposing counsel. Oops, sorry.
Sorry, proceed when ready.
Okay. Opposing counsel just stood up here and asked you why Genesis. Genesis was handed a bottle of 2019 Cara wine, a bottle that was seen improperly next to pesticides, a bottle that later tested positive for pesticides, a bottle that their own witness, Casey Soto, testified she drank the entire contents of. And that is why Genesis. That is why Genesis had pesticides in her system, and that is why she died from pesticide poisoning due to the negligence of Peony Estates. And that is why I am standing before you, asking you to find the defendant, Peony Estates, liable for negligence. Thank you.
Thank you, plaintiff's counsel. I guess we're just going to wait for the okay before we can give comments. All right, it looks like we got the okay. If the participants can turn on your camera, just so I remember who I'm talking about. I think we're missing the fence. Defense. There we go. Y'all heard enough from me, so I'll let Caroline start off and introduce herself, the wonderful person she is.
Hello, my name is Caroline Capilli. I went to Baylor University for undergrad and I did mock trial there for 3 years. And then now I'm a 2L at Notre Dame Law School. And lo and behold, me and Javier used to compete against each other at different schools, and I absolutely hated him. But this past summer, we worked at the same firm in Houston. So be kind to the people that you compete against because they will end up being your colleagues and coworkers in the future. Do you want to introduce yourself? And then we
Sure. Like Caroline said, I also competed in college and I compete in law school now. I'm a 3rd year. And then I also coach. So AMTA is in my blood, sadly, but I'll let Caroline start us off with comments.
Okay, so I guess we'll just go in the order of trial. So for the plaintiff opening, I really liked your presentation. I really enjoyed the fact that you were very purposeful in your movements. The only issues that I had were the fact that I thought at some points you spoke a little too fast. So I was trying to like keep up with that. But then also I couldn't really parse out y'all's theme because it seemed like it was a bunch of different like sentences thrown into one. So if y'all can like do what the defense did, their theme was like very crisp. And I really liked it. And that was probably my comment for the defense. Like I enjoyed y'all's theme. It made sense to me.
Yeah, I mean, I'm going to echo that. I like the wrong poison, but that should have come throughout the whole trial, not just open and close. And then Matt, I did like your movement. I know it's kind of different with Zoom, but like if you choose to stand and walk around, like do it right, and you did. So I like that.
Who did the first direct?
It was Matt and the investigator.
Yes, I really enjoyed your character. I thought it was believable and you kept it throughout, which I really appreciate, especially for character witnesses. I think it's really hard to keep it up like during cross. But yeah, I don't really have anything bad to say about y'all's direct.
Yeah, I mean, I like the direct. The only thing on the character lines, Noah, there was one point in your cross where you spouted out 3 in a row. It was like someone died.
Like 3 jokes in a row.
Yeah,
It was a little too much. So like towing that line.
Because then that like brought me out of the fiction. I'm like, okay, this guy's just a character, like, you know, as opposed to a really weird investigator who wants his story, you know. And then the crosser, I thought you had good objections and good job making them work for their hearsay, because it was hearsay and it was admission by party opponent, but I didn't even realize it was admission by party opponent until someone called it. So it's good to show us that you know that this is admission by party opponent.
Who was the crosser on this? Was it you in the middle? I really enjoyed y'all's back and forth. That was really good compared to what I watched this morning. So congrats to y'all.
Thank you.
So the second one was what is that? I don't even know how to say that. Anyway, I just like, I understand the like character, but like it just doesn't, I don't know if that's what comes from like the affidavit, if that's like the vibe that is given off, but I would definitely recommend like watching videos of actual like wine connoisseurs, because I don't think most wine people like act in that way. Watch Sour Grapes on Netflix and then kind of emulate that, I think would be more credible. I don't know if any of y'all have watched Sour Grapes, but it's really good.
Sour Grapes is like
Yeah,
Eight or-
so
8 or
wrap
9
that
out of 10.
and put that into y'all's characters.
Yeah, just kind of echo that. It seemed, I mean, it's mock trial. Everyone has their own character. I never witnessed. I only attorneyed, but I've seen Caroline witness with a character. And there's a certain line between like realistic and funny, and then just like over the top, like unbelievable. And it was at points it was both. So it wasn't. It was just hard to it's hard to take a character seriously when they're so outlandish. Not that it was bad. You portrayed a great like super outlandish wine connoisseur, but it's just like this is a trial. Someone died. I think
What Javi was saying, I would also add that I didn't feel like your energy stayed the same through cross. Like I noticed that your character stayed the same, but the energy did not stay the same. We had a girl on my team that did like similar characters to yours, and it was just like always a struggle to like keep that high energy. Like I know it's like a really long time, so definitely just think about that in the future. And I know we all have like Zoom fatigue, so I get it.
One thing I did want to notice for the directing attorney, I forget who it was, but there was the objection about the statute and whether her following the statute was that whole objection. You should have like tried to do it because it got sustained and then you just kind of moved on, and it was like totally noticeable. Like you just kind of gave up, and that's never a good look. That's all I got for that witness.
Who crossed this witness? Yes. So at some points, it kind of felt like a screaming match between like you and the witness. And given the fact that she is like such a bubbly witness, I probably wouldn't start off being as aggressive as you were. I think if you like also like reading the presiding judge is super important. Like your first few objections were really, really good, but then you tended to get a little more greedy near the end, especially like ending their direct on an objection. I think you kind of already made your point like earlier on in your objections. So just kind of being able to read the room a little more.
And I would have sustained the objection if it wasn't lack of foundation. I wrote down 403 or 702, but it's just like lack of foundation is such a weak thing. Who is next? The O'Keefe, right?
Yes.
Yeah.
I think it was kind of hard for you to variance your tone because to me it seemed very like angry and aggressive kind of thing. It was just a little off-putting. But I mean, I that's the only comment I have. So good job.
So I saw an O'Keefe earlier this morning, and I really liked his approach to the character. It was just like very stern. It was kind of similar to Noah's character, but obviously y'all are like on the same side. So if you're able to like distinguish a little bit between those two, I think that would be good. Just kind of taking like his route with the character more so. Yeah, I felt like at some points like you were just like kind of screaming all of the and so like what was the character? Was it like an angry like New York like type like I don't know.
You're muted.
Are you
No, you're muted.
I couldn't unmute. Sorry, I couldn't unmute. Yeah, the character was supposed to come off as like a stern, kind of hyped, FDA inspector who's like really
intense about enforcing safety codes.
Yeah.
And I picked up a little bit on that, but it seemed more like you're just annoyed like the whole time.
Okay.
Like that's a fine line. Like, oh, I'm a stickler for rules, and like, oh, why am I here?
Got it.
Anything else, Caroline?
No,
okay, and then the next witness, the crying wife. As soon as she got up there with the Soto, I forget the dude's name, the one who died. I was like, oh man, this is gonna be good. But then Patrick was firing back with the objections. That's great. Love both sides of it, all of it.
It was so good. The witness, phenomenal. Do exactly that for the whole entire season. Don't change it. like at all. It was not too little, but it also wasn't too much. And I loved like all of the background. I know like some people might object to narrative or whatever, but I think it really like pulls together like the whole thing. So I love witnessing. So 10 out of 10.
And then who's next? It was Blair. No, that's the one we just did. Who's the next witness?
Oh, Blair. Yes, that's right. That's right. Okay, it was hard for me because we had like this crying witness and it was just so emotional. And then we get like something that's like way on the other end of the spectrum. And at a few points, it's just like a little too much. And I know it's really hard to like toe the line with a character. But just remember that in order for it to be believable, you don't have to like throw in like a background line or like a joke like every single time. Try to like cut back on that a little more just so you can like keep up the credibility side of it.
Yeah, and honestly, I mean, I didn't have much. I stopped taking notes because it got pretty good. Not that it wasn't good, but I was like just very in tune with the trial. And I actually have to go, so I apologize. But I'm sure Caroline will give more substantive feedback than I will ever. But y'all did great. If I was harsh, it's because like, you know, judges are very tough in real life. For example, like Maddie, you got caught in time, right? You had one question. And I knew that a good witness, whoever you're crossing, was going to give you an impeachable answer, which he did. But you're out of time. So when you're running out of time, you shouldn't have gone into I have 3 last questions. You should have sat on that impeachment and not gone to the 3 last questions. Because it's a bigger point about knowing when to sit than finishing your cross. And on the other hand, the other team also ran out of time in closing. So like time management is huge because judges will not let you go past it. Like one of your attorneys said 1 question on redirect. I was like, all right, you have 1, because some judges will give you 1. So just be careful about your time and be careful about, you know, something that we might just consider as like normal talk, but to a court of law, like they will hold you to it. So that's all I got to say, but y'all were great.